Cindy, you have had so many years experience, internationally working with women leaders and women in all kind of pockets of industries and different skill sets and ages and the whole lot. So I'm really curious to see or to understand better, what are the patterns that you see when it comes to breaking that cycle? What is it that's holding women back from finding their voice, from standing out, from really stepping into their power? What would you say are the themes that come through?
They're not going to be that surprising. It's more about what do we do about it? But really, the number one thing that comes up over and over again, whether it's corporate, an entrepreneur, someone on a TED or TEDx stage, it's typically the fear of rejection. There's just this dialogue, something just comes up and it's just this internal tension that so many women that I see and I work with have, this desire to unleash, this desire to contribute, this desire to lead. And suddenly this absolute fear of rejection. And depending on which platform you're coming from, you're either going to allow that fear to pull you back, to downplay your voice, not always mute you, sometimes a full mute, other times it's downplaying or negating, or other times it will be by not actually injecting yourself at all. So that's the number one fear I see all the time.
Wow. And I would imagine, because it resonates with me, but I would also imagine that perhaps it's not as obvious that that's the thing that's helping us to self-sabotage, for example, or, not step forward, because it's our ego, helping us to stay safe, right? And not everyone is aware of that little voice, or we obviously hear it, but we don't understand necessarily it's the fear of rejection that is the meaning behind the negative voice in our head that says, who are you to do this?
Yeah, and what's so interesting though is that our very fear of rejection, by not speaking our truth and not contributing and being expressive with our creative ideas, we're already rejecting ourselves. So it's interesting, which rejection are we going to be playing into the most?
Wow, that's like a
wow, yes,
moment, is it?
That is a mic. So, okay, let's just pause on that for a moment. By not speaking our truth, by not stepping into our full potential and power, we're already self-perpetuating. We're in that self-perpetuating cycle of rejection. So we're already subconsciously doing the thing that we fear the most. We're doing the thing that's stopping us from stepping into our full power.
You've got it. And there's something deep within us that while we might not be able to put language towards this, the reason we know that this is happening, it is that tension. And it's why so many smart women go, why? Can I swear on this podcast?
Sure. We'll chuck an explicit on it.
Get my shit together. I've got this, but what it's that feeling inside. And that's what it is. Am I going to really lean into rejecting myself? Or is it really going to play into this fear of feeling rejected by others? So our bodies are understanding what's going on, but coming it up to our brain and understanding that in the moment is more challenging. That's why having these kind of discussions are so we can start to break it down more.
Wow, that body-brain connection, that trusting, that instinct, that listening to our bodies for the answers. Cindy, we've had conversations about this in the past around that intuition and stepping into that guidance a little bit more, which, is not easy all the time, is it? And sometimes it's like, I think you said, Ness, where we might hear a voice or we might kind of know that we're telling ourselves something, but we're not really aware of it even. And we've learned, I think, very general statement, Cindy, I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this, to ignore it, to not even notice that it's there, or put it to a different external source. Maybe I know this might be such a basic example, but maybe I ate too much or I didn't eat enough, and that's why I'm feeling a little bit tense or nauseous or whatever it might be. Is that the kind of thing that plays out? And how can we become more aware of this intuition to hear when our body is saying yes or no, or when we might be having these subconscious self-sabotaging behaviors?
I'm going to bring it around to what I often, and I experience it myself. So when I'm sharing this, I too experience this, and I need to become more in tune and aligned and aware and do the work to maintain this. But so many of us women have gone through stages in our lives where we have suffered from what I call amnesia. And it's because we have forgotten who we truly are. And that amnesia comes from a real powerful separation of what many of us play. We might not be aware of it. Some of us identify very strongly as this, and others of us don't, but we play the good girl. And I want to explain what I mean by that, and we'll bring it back around to intuition and amnesia for both of you. But my definition of a good girl is a woman, okay, not a girl, a woman who in any given moment in time chooses to dishonor herself in order to be safe with others. Wow. So in any moment of time, we dishonor ourselves in order to be safe. Now, I don't know a single woman, I don't know a single human being who hasn't done that. But here's the challenge, because sometimes that is the safest choice. It's psychological well-being. Sometimes that's safe, but we want it to be a conscious choice that that's what we're doing. Because then we don't identify with it. We're just choosing to play her for that moment. But when we're unconscious, and the more we make those choices, the more we do that, the more we start to identify with that. And the more we distance ourselves from our needs, the more we distance ourselves from our dreams and we start to dream realistic, the more we distance ourselves from our emotions, and the more we distance ourselves from our intuition. And hence the amnesia. And so many women going, God, like I used to be that person. I used to take those risks. I've traveled around the world. I've done this, but why am I struggling with this right here now? Because we need to keep connecting in.
So powerful. And it's interesting that you say that I used to be, when we think about the innocence of childhood and the ability to go out and do new things and not necessarily feel embarrassed about getting something wrong or sucking at something or that kind of thing. And yet as we get older and more experienced in business, and that fear, and I know I speak to business women about this, it's that imposter syndrome, that whole thing around looking at somebody else's external social media, wins, and comparing yourselves to them and feeling not enough because you've got into this position where you just think everyone else has got their shit together and you haven't, right? And you're the only one out there that hasn't. And so potentially what you're actually seeing in people who do step forward, who do find their voice, who do find the ability to step into their power and be seen, what you're seeing isn't somebody who's a superhuman. You're actually seeing somebody who has reconnected back in to that intuition and understood that the fear of others' rejection is actually less hurtful than the fear of your own rejection.
100%. Because when we don't feel connected to ourselves, we do look outside for people to help give it to us, and we never get it. The more we don't just intellectually know that, we keep making choices of how do I make it work for myself and what do I need? And we constantly ask those questions. Absolutely. We are way more apt to still fear the fear of wanting to, people to like us and to like knock things out of the park. That's going to be there, but it's not going to be what leads. It's going to sit on our shoulders just gently, but it's not going to be what leads or what actually creates that boundary.
Because I can remember there are times throughout my businesses where the results aren't showing up the way I want them to, and gone through that whole spiral of there's something wrong with my mindset. There's something wrong with me. Like, what have I got to change about me? I know it's not who I'm being, and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, you sort of go through this spiral of blaming yourself and feeling like why does everyone else get this and I don't get this? And I've reflected recently on how mean that is and how untrue that is, because the focus then comes right off being able to take action to change your results and your circumstances and just getting out there and doing things, and goes more into, I need to spend the next day journaling and figuring out where I've gone wrong, and maybe I need to hire a coach to make me realize what I've done wrong, or do this course, or do everything distraction, which is another way. Actually, it's just resonating with me now, which is potentially feeding that rejection of self.
100%. Like, I like to imagine, if you just think of there's a little planet called me, and it's quite small. And there's another planet beside you called others, and it's really big. And you're kind of, when you're in that place of, yeah, something's wrong with me. Why can't I get my crap together? Do I need to take a course? I need more before I can step in. What we're doing is we're orbiting around that and dancing around that and trying to get it from other people and get them to shine their light this way. And even when we do try to speak up, we're trying to speak up and be heard. We're trying to shout out, or we're trying to be seen. But the truth is that there is no different planet. We are all completely connected. And when we're connected, that's when we start to feel more whole. And in that space, we can start to honor and get quieter. And we've all done that, right? And that's why, you know, nature is such a powerful provider. It brings us back to this moment. It brings us back to this breath. Because if not, we're going to always think there's a distance between us and others, but there isn't. It's all here.
Wow, yes. Oh my gosh, I'm just getting all the feels from this conversation, ladies, like really all the feels. And I also think that space that we go to, and I know we've all been there, like that, it's a very busy head space, isn't it? And that thought, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I've got to do, and I've got to do this and go there, and all the examples that you both gave. And that links back to this whole piece around connecting back with the body, connecting back with our feelings, not the head feelings. And I love that you even brought up nature, Cindy, because when we come back to nature, it brings us actually back to ourselves and that connection, that wholeness. I love that analogy. We're not a separate planet. And the louder we try to be, the less we will be seen, and the less we'll be truly seen. And if we can connect back to ourselves, and a brilliant way to do that is nature. It is a reminder that we are all one. It's not big, small, it's not separate. And that's a beautiful space to be, to then start to, again, to link it back to that, whatever it is, trust that intuition. This is certainly an area I've been exploring, particularly over the last 12 months, and noticing that voice of what's wrong with me, and realizing that I'm not the only one asking myself that.
Yeah. And it's, again, one of the most powerful things that I notice with working with women, the number one take home is always, wow, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Like there's tips, there's tools, there's strategies, there's all that, but really, we're not alone.
Yeah.
And again, that's what I'm saying. We're not alone. We're all connected, right? We're all going through this journey and path. So one thing, like you're saying, is how we get so caught up in our head, so much so that we ask ourselves the most ridiculous questions. Like, why am I getting this wrong? Like, that is not a useful question to ask. Yes. Answer it, we go back in our heads and try to find another question. We analyze, or we think over and think through and think around. But what we really need, the moment we get so in our heads, we need, like you said, we need to get in our body. And one of the best ways is that we've got to ground. What does grounding look like? It's going to be different for anybody. But I actually get on the ground, get down on the ground with an animal, get down on the ground with kids. Like here in Australia, we're so gorgeous. Like being a Canadian, minus 40 winters, like I'm barefoot as often as I can.
Yes.
To the ground, to the sand, to the earth, to the ocean, anything but anchor. That's why a lot of yoga, you're sitting on the ground. right? Or even just lying on the ground, because we need to come from this back into the body, because the body doesn't lie.
Mm.
It doesn't. And we try to use our beautiful minds to lead, but our body needs to lead, and our hearts. And then the mind can come and work with that and work its magic. And we're coming from a very connected place with ourselves. So when we do speak up, our voice will be heard. It is not about getting louder. It's not about shouting. It's not about attention. It's about speaking our truth. And from that place, it's not such a push to do that at all.
It's interesting, we talk a lot about thriving in business without burnout. And if somebody's just going, hustling, working, stuck in the busy trap, really juggling all the balls in the air, how on earth can you reconnect to your body when you are burning the candle both ends, when you are putting the pressure? Obviously, everything that is challenging about business, when you're exhausted, feels harder. It then becomes, you as the business owner having the sole responsibility for other people and for putting food on the table or whatever it may be. And I think that, it's so important for us to create businesses that serve us and help us fulfill our goals in life. And that doesn't necessarily mean we need the $1 million turnover or anything like that. We were talking yesterday, Nikki and I, with a client who was saying, I just want to let you know, ladies know, as my mentors and coaches, I'm okay with not earning $1 million in my business. This is a lifestyle that I want. Here's my goals. These are why they matter. And I think that was just such an honest way of realizing, for me to be able to be, in her case, it was about being present for her teenage children and spending time with them. Then she needs to create a business that supports that. And I think sometimes that the women that we work with and the conversations I have with women in business can be about creating something that starts that way, but then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden you're stuck in this vortex of busyness and in the busy trap, and you've lost connection. So therefore, how can you possibly have the energy to speak up and hear your voice and all the dreams that you might have when you don't have a moment to reconnect? And that's what Nikki and I talk about a lot in these podcast episodes. How do you, that the episodes we've done on getting out into nature, the art of doing nothing, those kinds of things, I think we really need to create that space, don't we, Cindy, for this to be able to be felt.
Then that word you just said right there, Ness, that is the most luscious word any of us can ever sink into, is the word space. It's the word space, because just feel how we feel. Even right now, I feel it with the both of you. Spaciousness that allows collaboration, that allows new thoughts to come in right now as we're talking. There's a spaciousness. And I know for a fact, when I go, especially into corporate, women are expecting me to put up PowerPoints and to start getting into tools and the new edgy insights and this. And they're really shocked when it's about creating space. Right? Some for them, like wisdom just arises. Others, it's a space to just let go of all those burdens and those obligations and that guilt we feel from not putting it all together. Let go and just fuel ourselves from that space. Yeah, and you're also talking about, and it's that space that informs our own metrics of success. You were mentioning your client. All of us need to, and constantly look over, what are my metrics for success? Right here, right now, what are they? And they're allowed to change, definitely, but they're not going to change from the external, from what other people are telling me. Even gorgeous coaches and mentors, we want to hear great things, but we also still then, especially if you come from a very strong good girl identity, you still really need to run that through you, right? And still come from, actually, I love what they're saying here. However, this is what I need to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally really resonate with that good girl story. And I think your definition was that dishonest self to be safe to others. I absolutely can see why so many people would relate to that. And it's not something that you can just be aware of and then let go. I think that's sort of what you're saying there, is that filter might still be there, but it's learning to be aware and to observe it potentially instead of identify with it. So it's that separation piece, which I think is so important. And that I love your concept of the amnesia as well. And the other thing I want to touch on is when you talked about measure of success, and a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast, and I know for myself and Ness in our business, and we have so many KPIs and measures of success and target and very masculine approach. And that's important. That structure in business, that's important. And I remember early days in my previous business talking to a woman in business and saying, right, let's create some KPIs for life. So it still had that measure of success. This is important. And as business women and leaders, we understand that. We thrive on that in business. But how do we create that structure in other areas to bring forth more things like a KPI could be getting into nature once a week or once a day. It could be spending time with your loved ones. It could be, I have soulful Sundays or sacred mornings. I love naming them fun, beautiful things. That helps me. For other people that don't need that. But that's a really good way to transition. I think sometimes when we get stuck in one area of life, it's really helpful to look at what's another area that I have gotten success. Another easy example for me, health and well-being, exercise, could never have, until probably 5 years ago, did not have discipline. And then I thought, hang on a second, I'm so disciplined in my business. What if I bring some of that structure into my personal life? And now it's actually something I enjoy. I mean, Ness and I, you've been on that journey with me from the beginning. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because this is such a powerful conversation. And there's a lot in this conversation that we can listen to actually over and over again. And sometimes it can feel a little bit like, well, geez, I don't even know where to start with this. And I think so that's something for listeners to keep in mind. Bring some structure over, whether it's the measures of success or what works in other areas and how can you apply that without over structuring it, over masculining it, because this is embracing the feminine energy as well. And I'd love to, my goodness, I feel like we might have a second podcast episode coming in this, because I'm just aware of time. And I'd love to do, actually, I've got a final question, but Ness, any additional thoughts or questions before I ask Cindy?
I have like 100.
Yeah, no. I keep an eye out for part 2, everybody.
Yeah, let's roll with that. Let's do a part 2 of this conversation, and you go into your question.
Okay, great. Cindy, before I actually ask you the final question, is there anything else that comes up that you want to share in terms of what I just added?
Well, it may be part of your question, but let me just add on to that. How I see it is when I actually see like an interconnected planet with me. And what's in there is what I put the body, mind, heart, and spirit. And so what I mean by that is that I remember myself going, oh my gosh, like I have a little dude in, grade 3, school, starts just before 9, school pickup is before 3 o'clock. I have barely 5 hours. And that was my language. Oh my gosh, my gosh. However, when I got really honest with myself, like, I don't want to work any more of those hours, because what's so important to me is actually being able to go there and have those interactions with him and his friends and the other parents and all of that. And, when I get really clear, I'm like, actually, that really supports my heart space to do that. And that is one of the metrics of success of my business. And I'm just going to get savvier and smarter and leaner in my business. Instead of going, oh, like, I wish I just had a few more hours. Yeah. I could. And there's nothing wrong with anyone who wants that. Right. But I get to understand. So when I'm then with my kiddo or with my family, I don't feel this separation. I see how it is a contributing success metrics to my life and my business.
Because
That's
it is
powerful.
about being holistic, isn't it? And I think that, we talk about that with the vision piece. You need to have a business vision, but you've got to understand how it emotionally connects to your vision. So on those really tough times, you get out of bed and go, why am I doing this? You're coming back to that connection. And what I'm hearing in that is it's this piece of looking at how you run your business and how that fits into life. And I think,
Yes.
a lot of people do resonate with that whole thing around, I hear mothers particularly say, I feel guilty when I'm with my child because I'm thinking about work, and I feel guilty when I'm at work because I'm thinking about I should be with my children. I have 100% been there when my kids were younger and I started my first business. And it wasn't until I got that realization around setting boundaries and understanding that, this makes me a better mother, but being present for my children means that I can walk away from my work and then be back and be present for that. And so I love that you're bringing this holistic picture together to say, you get to do this, you get to do this. How lucky are we that we get to create businesses? Because I even fall into that same trap around there aren't enough hours in the day and I've really got so much on. It's like, oh, I get to go to the gym at 5:30. How amazing is that? As opposed to feeling stressed or pressured because I haven't got everything done that I need to do. And now I've got to walk out the door. And, so I love that reframe and looking at it from that whole perspective. And the thing that I can't get out of my head is what you said earlier around like planet me and then planet everyone else being huge. It's actually, no, we're all together. So I think that's just a summary, not a question, but yeah, I'm loving this conversation. So I'm looking forward to part 2.
And a key thing in that is we subconsciously often try to fit life into business. But what if we turned it around and fit business into life, which is exactly what you were saying, Cindy, that you've done. When I have that feeling of joy with my kid, with my hanging out at the schoolyard, picking him up and seeing him with his friends, there's what I'm seeing is that there's this feeling of, yes, I'm kicking my business goals right now.
Yeah. Can you imagine saying that? Absolutely. And yes, or when you're in business and you're really like focused and honoring yourself, you're like, I'm kicking my life goals.
Yeah.
Voice. And really, when you think about it, there's times where I'm just walking the dog or, the responsibility of walking the dog, I get my best, clearest ideas for business.
Yes.
And then when I'm really focused on business or really spoken my truth, I come back to the people that are the nearest and dearest to me, and I'm really present. Like that divide, we get caught up in it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's my final question, and it has changed based on this. So this was meant to happen, everybody. Thank you, everyone listening, for coming on the journey. My question is, what's one action? We always like to finish the episode with one actionable action that people can take. And it's about this. What's one action that people can take to start to close that divide between business over here, life over there? This fitting, life into business, business into life, not the other way around. What's one action? Because this is a big cycle for a lot of people to break. I'm sure, I know for me it has been, ladies, I'm sure it has been for you. So one action around closing that divide.
I'm gonna share the action is really a question I'd love women to ask themselves more.
Right.
That is, how can I make this work for me?
Brilliant question.
That's so simple and powerful.
Yes. And what it is we start to become deliciously selfish, which we need to do more of, especially if you played into the good girl. So again, how can I make this work?
Yeah.
You already gave an example, Nikki, right? I want to do exercise. I know in my head it's important and I actually want to do it, but I'm not dang doing it. How can I make this work for me? How can I make this work for me? And by you, whether you actually asked yourself that, but you did physically ask yourself that, you came up with this, actually, I can connect it to how I do great focused discipline in this area of my life. Right? If I can just give one more example, right. I remember doing my best and first getting into business, and I'm so not my numbers girl, structure girl, like, right? And I'm frustrated, but it was an important piece. Like, how can I make this work for me? Started asking myself that question. Like, I love coffee. I love coffee shops. I don't even drink coffee. I love coffee. And so I started taking all my stuff, like, and I bring it all to the cafe. And this is where there's all receipts and everything. I get my favorite tea and usually my favorite ginger cookie. And I'd staple and I'd listen to tunes and I'd listen to people, and 3 hours would go by. I did what I needed to do in business, but I got to feel connected. It's a big core thing for me, is to feel connected and to be in beautiful spaces that inspire me or make me feel funky. And so ask yourself, like, how can you make it work for you?
Love it. Love it.
Such a good question and a great action. And I love, for those of you who are listening, Cindy was literally dancing in her seat as she was talking about BAS statements. So that strategy definitely works, friends. Absolutely try it. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us on part 1 of this conversation. We really look forward to doing part 2 shortly. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Wait. Yes.
I'm just going to check in.
Great.
Cindy, I have loved this conversation, as I'm sure our listeners have. So what is the best way for people to enter into your world, into your beautiful charisma and amazing energy? How can people get in touch with you?
Well, first of all, thank you, amazing women. You're doing incredible work in the world. And I'm so thrilled you have amazing clients, and more are going to come your way. And I'm just so honored to be with you. The best way right now is, because I'm revamping all the website, normally be to actually go to my website, but it would actually be via LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably the place to connect with me right now. So Cindy M. Kennedy, the initial M for my name, used to be Mojo, but Cindy Kennedy, that would be the best place. Come connect with me there. And any way I can support, celebrate other women, finding their voice, really honoring themselves, aligning, grounding. Yeah.
Fabulous. Wonderful. We will make sure that your connection to LinkedIn is in the show notes so that you can have people come out and reach you over there, and stay informed around when your book launches. Hopefully not too far away now. That would be amazing.
Absolutely. That sounds fantastic, ladies. What a great conversation. I do feel like we've just touched the surface.
Yes, I know. And ironically, I'm off to go do a yoga class now, everybody. So talk about bringing it in holistically.
I love it.
Thank you so much again.
Thanks, people. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.